Hello, I am Eduardo Halfon, and I'll be reading from CANCIÓN, a finalist for the 2022 Big Other Book Award for Translation, translated from the Spanish by Lisa Dillman and Daniel Hahn. I arrived in Tokyo disguised as an Arab. At the airport exit, a small delegation from the university was awaiting me, despite its being past midnight. One of the Japanese professors, the hierarch, evidently, was the first to greet me in Arabic, and I simply smiled, in equal parts courtesy and ignorance. A young woman, whom I took to be the hierarch's assistant or a grad student, wore a white mask and sandals so dainty she looked barefoot. She kept bowing her head to me in silence. Another professor welcomed me, in poor Spanish, to Japan. A younger professor shook my hand and then, still holding it, explained in English that the official chauffeur from the university department would take me to the hotel right away, so I could rest before the event the following morning. The chauffeur, a short, gray-haired old man, was dressed as a chauffeur. After recovering my hand and thanking them all in English, I said goodbye, imitating their gestures of reverence, and set out after the old man, who had already picked up speed on the sidewalk and was taking quick, anxious steps in the light drizzle. In no time, we got to the hotel, which was very close to the university, or at least that's what I thought I understood from the chauffeur, whose English was even worse than my 5 or 6 words of Arabic. I also understood him to say that that part of Tokyo was famous for its prostitutes or its cherry trees. It wasn't too clear which, and I was embarrassed to ask. He parked in front of the hotel, and with the engine still running, got out of the car, hurried to open the trunk, dropped my things at the entrance, all, it struck me, with the desperation of someone about to pee in their pants, and left me whispering words of farewell or of warning. I stood on the sidewalk, slightly confused, but happy to be there at last, amid the shrieking lights of midnight in Japan. The rain had cleared. The black asphalt gleamed neon. The sky was a huge vault of white clouds. I thought it would do me good to go for a little walk before heading up to the room. Smoke a cigarette, stretch my legs, breathe in the jasmine of the still warm night. But I was afraid of the prostitutes. I had come to Japan to participate in a Lebanese writers' conference. After receiving the invitation a few weeks earlier, and after reading it and rereading it until I was sure it wasn't a mistake or a joke, I'd opened the closet to find my Lebanese disguise, among my many disguises, inherited from my paternal grandfather, born in Beirut. I'd never been to Japan before, and I had never been asked to be a Lebanese writer. A Jewish writer? Yes. A Guatemalan writer? Obviously. A Latin American writer? Of course. A Central American writer? Less and less. A U.S. writer? More and more. A Spanish writer, when traveling on that passport, was desirable. A Polish writer, on one occasion, at a Barcelona bookstore that insists, on shelving my books in the Polish literature section. A French writer, since I lived for a time in Paris, and some people assume I'm still there. I keep each of those disguises on hand, nicely ironed and hanging in the closet. But I'd never been invited to participate in anything as a Lebanese writer, and playing an Arab for a day at a conference at the University of Tokyo seemed a trivial matter if it was going to enable me to see the country. He slept in his chauffeur's uniform. That's what I thought when I saw him standing beside me, unmoving, undaunted, waiting for me to finish my breakfast so he could drive me to the university. The old man had his hands behind his back, his pompous blank stare fixed on one exact point on the wall before us in the hotel cafeteria. He didn't greet me, he didn't say a word, he didn't rush me, but the whole of him resembled a water balloon about to burst. Nor did I greet him. I simply looked down and kept eating my breakfast as slowly as I could while I read over my notes on a sheet of hotel stationery and practiced, in hushed tones, the various ways of saying thank you in Arabic. Shukran, shukran lak, shukran lakum, shukran jazalan. Then, when I finished my miso soup, I stood up, smiled at the black and white balloon beside me, and went to get some more. My Lebanese grandfather wasn't Lebanese. I began to find this out, or to understand it, a few years ago, while in New York, searching for clues and documents about his firstborn son, Salomon, who died as a child not in a lake, as I'd been told when I was growing up, but there, in some private clinic in New York, and was buried in some cemetery in the city. I didn't manage to locate any documents about the boy Salomon, nothing, not one, as if he hadn't died there either, in a private clinic in New York. But I did find the actual logbook, in perfect condition, from the ship that brought my grandfather and his siblings over on June 7, 1917. The ship was called the España. It had set sail from Ajaccio, the capital of Corsica, where all of the siblings had gone with their mother after fleeing Beirut. Days or weeks before setting off for New York, they'd buried her there. But today, nobody knows what my great-grandmother died of, or where on the island her grave is located. My grandfather, as I read in the ship's logbook, was then 16 years old, single, spoke and read French, worked as a shop assistant, clerk, typed out, and his nationality was Syrian, also typed out. Next to that, in the race or people column, the word Syrian was also typewritten. But then the immigration officer had corrected or doubted himself. He crossed the word out and wrote over it by hand the word Lebanese. And you see, my grandfather always said he was Lebanese, I said, the microphone hardly working, although Lebanon as a country was not founded until 1920. That is, 3 years after he and his siblings left Beirut. Prior to that, Beirut was part of Syrian territory. Legally, they were Syrians. They'd been born Syrians, but they called themselves Lebanese, perhaps as their race or people, the way it was written in the logbook, perhaps as their identity. And so I am the grandson of a Lebanese man who was not Lebanese, I told the audience at the University of Tokyo, and dropped the microphone. I don't know whether out of respect or confusion, the Japanese audience remained silent.